Fats. Do you still think that saturated fat is the ultimate villain in the heart disease story? Well, you might still be in good company for now. For decades, this dietary demon has been blamed for soaring cholesterol and clogged arteries. But what if we've got it all wrong? Recent research is turning the tables on saturated fat. We're discovering that the relationship between diet, cholesterol, and heart health is far more intricate than a simple good versus bad narrative. Today, we're going to challenge everything we thought we knew about saturated fat and explore the exciting new science that's reshaping our understanding of heart health. Was all that information actually true? Where did the idea come from? Is it true that saturated fat can increase LDL? Yes, it is. And the idea that high LDL increases the risk of heart disease has been around for decades. Both of these statements have been facing important questions over the past year. Recent scientific research, especially the lean mass hyperresponder evidence, and we'll define that in a minute. This evidence challenges the belief. The term refers to individuals who, in response to a high saturated, low carb diet, experience a significant increase in LDL cholesterol, often surpassing conventional thresholds. Surprisingly, these individuals do not seem to suffer adverse cardiovascular events. They don't grow plaque more than others. Now, research is still developing in this area. This paradoxical finding challenges the traditional notion that elevated LDL cholesterol alone is a reliable predictor for heart attacks. This evidence suggests that a high saturated fat diet can increase LDL cholesterol. But surprisingly, people, especially in this category, don't seem to have more heart attack problems or plaque or cardiovascular inflammation. That goes against what we thought about high cholesterol for decades. Is it really a direct risk for heart attacks? A few weeks ago, we posted a video with Nick Norwitz and Dave Feldman. They've been doing a lot of research in this area, especially over the past couple of years. Today, we're covering more research from that team. The principal investigator, Dr. Adrian Soto Mota, provides even more evidence that tends to support the fact or the upcoming potential fact that, and maybe I gave myself away and my belief, that saturated fat is not the enemy. It's not that metabolic villain that we've always thought. Metabolic disease, or our metabolism, whether our metabolism is healthy or not, it's a much more complex but effective way of looking at this. Now, a complete opposite view to most dietary guidelines. So does this mean that low-carb diet is dangerous and unhealthy? Maybe not. Is high LDL really an issue? Maybe not. Not all LDL cholesterol is the same, and that is a key to this information. This evidence tells us that instead of just looking at how much LDL you have, we should consider the type of LDL particles. Density is important, but especially size. The size of LDL particles may be the critical thing here, the critical differential detail. This shift in focus from holding and looking at the amount of LDL only to understanding the characteristics of that LDL population. LDL comes in a normal curve, just like HDL. And I'm not going to go down that bunny hole right now, but we can go later if we need to during the Q&A session. Is saturated fat the most important factor that increases LDL? The article we're presenting today talks about how people on a low-carb diet, high saturated fat, had changes in LDL cholesterol. It was influenced by their BMI, not so much by the saturated fats. This example shows that different types of low carb diets and increased LDL might be related more to how our bodies process lipids than just the amount of bacon that we eat. Now, that processing lipids comes in a whole new mechanism. Dave Feldman made it more well known. He calls it the lipid energy model. That's another bunny hole that I'm not ready to go down yet. But again, we can if you want to go there in the Q&A session. In simple terms, the lean mass hyperresponder evidence shows that the relationship between diet, cholesterol, and heart health is more complicated than we thought. Instead of blaming specific nutrients and bacon, we should take a more holistic approach to health. This means promoting a balanced diet, regular exercise, and addressing lifestyle factors that affect overall well-being. The myth, yes, I use the term the myth, that saturated fat, high LDL cholesterol, and heart attacks go hand in hand is changing. It's crumbling. The lean mass hyperresponder evidence challenges what we thought about cholesterol's role in heart health. Looking at things in a more detailed and personalized way will lead us to better approaches for heart health. Understanding the complexities of diet and heart health is an ongoing process. All of us will continue to learn more. Jesus, do you want to start?
Yes, but I'm going to yield to Jeannie for a moment because we have an announcement to do. It's going to be real quick, I promise.
Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry, Jeannie. We got to get...
you're on mute, Jeannie.
Okay, so I'm off mute, and we do have an announcement. We are having another conference. This time, it'll be on the west side of the U.S., and it will be in Dallas, Texas, April 18th through 20th. It's the Heart Attack and Stroke Prevention Conference. It will probably sell out quickly. Just be aware of that. If you need to call for information, the number is 859-721-1414.
That was quicker than I expected.
Sorry.
and just we're calling it Summit because Fred, key part of our team, doesn't like the word conference.
Oh, sorry, Summit. I'm sorry. Thank you for the correction.
And if you've been to these, you realize it's not a conference. A conference is where you sit down and you listen to people present stuff. This is totally different. It's almost like a pop-up clinic. People get their information. They get their labs as part of registration for the meeting. And so they come to the meeting with their labs. So like your typical evaluation with us is it's a telemedicine 1-on-3. Usually you have 2, 3, sometimes 4 of us going over your information with you. In these meetings, you bring your information in terms of your labs with you, and you also have a CIMT. So we all get a CIMT. We have that available as well. And then we learn how to interpret it. One of the most important and enlightening parts of this is that you really begin to understand where you stand in relationship to others. And that's a big part that's missing in the individual evaluation process.
Well, and I should probably just redo the whole thing because I messed it all up. But one of the big takeaways from the last one was that all of the people there had something, in common, and I think they had a really good support system too. And we have a lot of interaction and going over labs and clinical stuff. So definitely more than a conference. And if I could read, I would have said summit. So there we go.
Well, you bring up another good point. These can be emotional. And Jeannie, you laughed at me when I talked about boomer men. Boomer men are guys my age, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I think I'm in the peak. I'm 66, and I think that's the peak of the boomer generation. But anyhow, I've mentioned it multiple times. Guys our age were taught from day one Big boys don't cry. And yet we often do. We had two big boys, boomer guys, actually start crying in front of everybody else as they were dealing with some of these issues, and walked out with a big smile on their face. So these can be fairly intense.
And they're really encouraging for, we would see the same people kind of sitting together. And of course, everyone was talking with everyone, but they really would encourage one another. I'm sure there's probably relationships that developed from that summit last time.
Oh, they do. You don't go through that kind of intensive boot camp type of experience without developing some very strong bonds.
Yep.
The last thing I will say about this, I'm going to jump out to the next part. Yes, it will be banter between Dr. Brew and I.
Oh, my goodness.
So let's talk about saturated fat and cholesterol. Dr. Brewer changed the title like 3,000 times. Saturated fat and cholesterol. Did you miss it? Because many did. We did not. We did not. The researchers are friends of ours, and I'm sorry, this is like very tiny, but this is just a screenshot of the article. As Dr. Brewer said, this article was led by Adrian Soto Mota, which is a Mexican doctor, with Nick Norwitz, Dave Feldman, and Dr. David Ludwig, so who are big personalities on the field.
Jesus, pardon the interruption, but can you tell? Well, I'll do it. Adrian Sotomoto is a physician with good internal medicine and/or prevention training, but then he went to, wasn't it Cambridge, and got a PhD in human metabolism.
I think it was Oxford. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Oxford, Cambridge.
I think.
My apologies to the folks at Oxford. And Nick Norwitz, by the way, has a doctorate also in
same PhD,
human metabolism at Oxford. And Nick is a third-year medical student at Harvard. So both of these guys are pretty deep. Dave Feldman is the first to give himself up to say, hey, guys, I'm just an engineer. But it's not just an engineer working in a vacuum. The last guy that's working on that team that I'll mention is Matthew Butoff. And everybody that knows cardiovascular research, for example, the calcium score and several other things, is very aware of Matthew Butoff, well-known cardiologist and medical researcher.
Unless you're that guy that criticized their work and said, who's that doctor who's in there with them?
Oh, and while I'm thinking about it, I'm confusing issues because the senior researcher on the study that you're getting ready to describe was David Ludwig. And you want to tell us why we shouldn't confuse it with Robert Lustig?
We recorded something with Robert Lustig and presented it last week, and they are aware, they're friends, I believe, and they're aware that there's confusion between Ludwig and Lustig, but different people, both doing a lot of great job on this.
Both of them are actually there's more. The similarities go further than their last name. So Robert Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist running the obesity unit at UC San Francisco, and way deep into the low carb world. David Ludwig is also an endocrinologist, I think also a pediatric endocrinologist at Harvard, not UC San Francisco, and running the obesity unit there. So, and also very big into the low carb world. Both of them focus much more on hormonal reasons for weight management. So a lot of people like to confuse those two guys, even themselves.
Maybe separated at birth. But let's go with the study. So the premise is the next one. Low-fat diet decreases LDL cholesterol, therefore it's better. Low-carb diet increases LDL cholesterol, therefore it's dangerous. But there's more than that. As anything in life and health, it's not that simple. So our friends did a meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, gathering research, getting randomized control trials, and seeing what the evidence says on that side. They included this meta-analysis included about 1,000 participants, and the idea was to see what's the impact of BMI, body mass index, on people on a low carb diet that's being defined as eating less than 130 grams of carbs a day, and if that impacted LDL changes at all. These are the groups and the results. So people who were on a low carb diet and had a low BMI, lean people, had higher levels of LDL. This is fitting with the lean mass hyperresponder theory, or let's call it a model. Then people on a low carb diet with a high BMI, they had lower levels of LDL. And when comparing that to people eating a lot of carbs, or the standard recommendation of carbs, 75% of your diet, there was no difference on LDL regardless of the BMI. So those are interesting findings. It's putting the impact on LDL more on your BMI if you are on a low carb diet. But let's go to other findings. There's another group, the group of people on a low carb diet eating more saturated fat, about 70% of saturated fats. But these people all have a high BMI. They're bigger. Well, the surprise is there was no significant change in LDL. What happens on the people on a low carb diet eating a lot of saturated fats, but with a lower BMI? Lean people, low carb diet, high saturated fat intake. Surprise, surprise, the LDL just went off the roof. And we have a third group, because you might say, well, that LDL probably increased because of that high saturated fat diet, right? Well, they had people on a low carb diet eating way less saturated fat, still lean, low BMI. Those people still had a higher LDL compared to the other groups. So if you see here, the correlation or the association findings on this research is, it seems like when you are on a low carb diet, the thing that it's going to impact if your LDL increases or not is not saturated fats. It might be your BMI. It might be your body fat more than the amount of saturated fats you eat on a daily basis. We have a fourth group, people on a high carbohydrate diet eating a lot of saturated fats with a high BMI. So you're eating a lot of carbs. You're eating a lot of those poisonous saturated fats, and you're probably fat, because we don't know if there's a lot of muscle in there. We just know that they have a high BMI. Well, it didn't seem to impact LDL. There was not a big difference. People on a high carbohydrate diet with a high saturated fat intake, but with a low BMI, no significant change on LDL either. So this association between body mass index and LDL seem to only fit to people on a low carb diet, which is supporting the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. And the last week, if you want to know more about these models, we were talking about two main models: the carbohydrate insulin model, meaning a lot of carbs you eat, a lot of insulin gets secreted by the pancreas, and you're gonna be fat, versus the calories in, calories out model, where the more calories you eat, the more fat you get. Then Robert Lustig explained, well, you need to take a look at the mitochondria and see that work functioning. That's called the redox model. Oxidative stress, which you probably heard before. Another bunny hole to go another date, or just go to the video last week. And the fourth one is obesogens, the environment and other substances causing you to get fat. This one is focusing on the carbohydrate and insulin model. Bottom line from this research, body mass index influences LDL more than saturated fats. I make that when you are on a low carb diet, less than 130 grams of carbs a day. LDL doesn't seem to be the cause of heart disease. And even if it is, on people on a low carb diet, saturated fats doesn't seem to be increasing it. No more than BMI is doing that. Care to translate any, Jeannie or Dr. Brewer? I know that joke is getting old. I know.
I think that, a lot of the information is kind of the same thing that we're seeing over and over again with, the LDL and that not being the culprit of the issue, it being more of the blood sugar being the issue. Dr. Brewer?
I'm just going to take one piece out of what you said and make the comment that, yes, I've heard that too. The statement that lean mass hyperresponder is a theory or lipid energy model is a theory is really not, it's implying that it's only theoretical. And I don't think that's the case anymore. Clearly, the lean mass hyperresponder it's a phenomenon. It's something that we see. We see over and over again. There's no subjectivity to it. There's no theory to it. People with lower BMIs who are dropping their carbs will often go into a much higher LDL mode, 200 and above. If you look at the lean mass hyperresponder publication that's been accepted for publication, it's what was the average? Wasn't it like 272 or something like that?
The one that's 1 in 1,000?
Yes, it's 1 in 1,000 LDL levels. So this is not theoretical. This is observed. It's a phenomenon.
And I apologize. I'm not using a teleprompter like Dr. Brewer does. So I'm getting it on the fly from my head, and I apologize because there's plenty of evidence. And Dave Feldman, Nick Norwitz, all those guys have been working a lot on providing evidence on this. So my bad for calling it a theory.
Oh no, it's not your bad. I'm saying I could not agree with you more. I've gone through that same thought process, and I'm glad that you demonstrated that to the viewers, because that's a big deal. This is not a theory anymore, and I'm glad that we're actually discussing that. It needs to happen.
Yep, and of course, put us a message on the chat. Hey, I did not understand what Dr. Brega said. Can you repeat that? We can do another live. And make sure to subscribe first so we can see the message. And let's go to another research from this same team. If there are no questions, of course, Jeannie, you can come in and try to clarify and if that's necessary.
So I will interrupt and say one other thing, Jesus. We're finding out, to that point, the point that you're making, we're spending a lot less time just doing quick responses and talking about what's going on in the practice, in the channel, and with our patients. And we're spending more time planning, making sure that we've clarified our communications to people. And we're getting a ton of feedback that the viewers like it. They appreciate it. So I appreciate, you'll see that more. And as Jesus was talking about, we spend more time prepping what we want to say and how we want to get clarity on it. We're never going to get it 100%. Perfection is just not going to happen. But I appreciate what you did this morning as well, Jesus, both helping me prepare the clarity for the introduction and you preparing some more clarity for your side as well.
I appreciate the flowers, and it's all about helping the audience. We both, Dr. Brewer and I, we acknowledge that sometimes we get out all over our heads with our medical jargon, and we're trying to make it as simple as possible. Okay, so let's go to another research. Now, this one, I need you to put a lot of attention to this because it can get tricky. This is a publication from Nature Medicine. And the researchers on this one basically said, hey, we have heard about this low-carb diet, and we believe the model that's based on, the carbohydrate insulin model, maybe doesn't fit. We believe that the model that is causing the obesity epidemic is calories in, calories out, and that saturated fats are a problem. Therefore, according to guidelines, we're recommending a low-fat diet more than we can recommend a low-carb diet. That's basically what they said on this research. So they compared two groups and put them through the same diets, low-fat versus low-carb, 2 weeks each. So one group started with low-fat, the other group started with low-carb, and they switched and see what happened. How much calorie intake, how much energy are they eating on each diet? And you can see here what they define as plant-based low-fat diet versus what they define as low-carb diet, which you can see is just the difference between where your energy is coming from. Plant-based low-fat diet, 75% carbs. Low-carb diet, 75% fat. The findings from this study, from the Nature study, was people in a low-fat diet consumed less energy than people on a low-carb diet. And this research for a couple of years, this is from 2021, was used as evidence to say, hey, even though you low-carb diet guys are eating more calories, and that's probably not being helpful for you, right? And this carbohydrate insulin model seems to have a lot of patches to be dealt with. Doesn't fit. Of course, I don't know what happened through Nick Norwitz and Adrian's mind when they saw that, and they decided, hey, let's take a closer look to their evidence, because there's one thing that these Nature Medicine researchers did not consider, which is a washout period between diets. They said that it didn't matter, that you can just switch diets from one day to another, and that doesn't impact the way you respond to that and how many calories, how many energy you are eating, or your intake. So it doesn't matter. And Adrian and Nick said, maybe it does. Maybe it does matter. How much time do you take from changing from low fat to low carb, and from changing from low carb to low fat diet? So they reassess the evidence that is available. And this is what they found. On this reanalysis of the original study, they saw that energy intake on a low-carb diet was much lower when this diet was consumed before the low-fat diet. And energy intake and insulin secretion, how much insulin you're putting out, was higher on a low-carb diet, but only when that low-carb diet was done after the low-fat diet. So meaning, if you start with a low-fat diet and you see benefits, and then you switch to a low-carb diet, you'll still see some benefits, but it's going to be put on the low-fat diet, like saying, oh, it's a low-fat diet, not so much a low-carb diet. And if you start with a low-carb diet, and then you switch to a low-fat diet, any bad side that you see on there is going to be blamed on the low-carb diet. So the order matters. The washout period matters. It's not just about switching from one diet to another. Low-fat diet has benefits, but from there to say that the carbohydrate insulin model is a flaw, that's a big leap to take.
So, Jesus,
Go ahead, Dr.
Pardon the interruption. It's not so much a translation, but you're getting to the key confusing point that slows a lot of people down on this analysis. Bottom line is it was a crossover study. And they did what? 2 weeks. They did 2 groups, 2 weeks on low carb in one group, followed by 2 weeks on low fat. And in the other group, 2 weeks of low fat, followed by 2 weeks of low carb. Correct?
That's correct.
And they found out that the sequence matters. In fact, what they found out was the group that gained the most weight in a 2-week period was the group that started out for 2 weeks on low fat and then transitioned over to low carb. Now, that's interesting. The original study group said, yep, that shows that low carb is bad for you. You gain weight. Now, the new guys came in, looked at that same data and said, wait a minute, you're ignoring insulin. Why did that matter? Ignoring insulin. What did that have to do with this study?
Well, one thing you need to be aware of, and I have seen some people on different videos and channels saying, that's just mechanistical, that's just metabolism for the textbooks, doesn't apply. But I don't think I agree that much. Insulin, especially elevated insulin, can impact the way you burn fat. The higher insulin, the higher the struggle for you to burn that fat and gain weight. So it matters.
In fact, insulin is the weight gain hormone. That's what it's all about. If you have a 12-year-old who's thin, insulin is critical to the development into a 24-year-old adult because it's going to be required for growth. There's a related hormone, IGF-1, and that stands for insulin-like growth factor. The whole insulin-related metabolism is a growth metabolism. And that's one of the reasons that it's a big problem once we get up into our 40s, 50s, and 60s. We don't need to be growing more. And that's one of the most common, it is the most common problem in people that are getting into insulin resistance. Their insulin's going up. Their insulin going up is causing them to no longer burn fat, but deposit fat and start growing.
How many people have we seen that are on a weight loss journey? They hit a plateau, and then we find out they have very high levels of insulin.
To me, that's the number one. That's by far the most common thing that we see. I've hit a plateau. I can't lose weight further, and then we find their basal insulin usually, but sometimes other reactive insulins levels just too high. And so when you're trying to lose weight and your insulin's too high, you're really fighting an uphill battle.
And
now
that's
go ahead.
No, and that's just one of the things that we do look at that's different and helps us to kind of see. And I see a lot of questions about carbs and how many should you eat and this and that and the other thing. And that's why we encourage the test and don't guess, even with each person and each individual metabolism and glucose monitors and all the rest of it. So good points.
Thank you, Jeannie. Now, before we go to a Q&A, we have a 2-minute video from something we recorded with Dave Feldman and Dr. Adrian, the lead author of this study and the original study we covered. And I hope this helps to you understand a little bit more about why eating low-fat versus low-carb diet, when to do it, and taking some time between diets matters. So, Gilbert, if you can show the video for the audience. Thank you.
But I was trying to explain this to my sister earlier, and correct me where I'm wrong when I'm telling her this, because I was trying to explain this reanalysis, why it was a big deal and so forth. And I said, when you're trying to do a crossover trial, as I understand it, the whole purpose of doing a crossover trial is actually literally because you're wanting to prove that the order of the interventions you're doing doesn't have enormous relevance. That's the whole reason for the randomization and typically for having things like a washout period in between. But if I was to try to trick her into having a particular diet and consuming less on that diet ad libitum, then would it matter what she consumed beforehand? And I said, I think these data support that it does. So in other words, if you were going to go on a plant-based diet and you were coming from a standard American diet, then if I wanted to trick you into consuming less, I would instead prime you by first having a couple weeks of a ketogenic diet. And then I think you would end up consuming less. Would it be fair to say these data support that conclusion?
I think yes, but I think in more evolutionary terms. We evolved a metabolism that knows that seasons don't change within 1 week. To me, it makes sense. There is some form of metabolic memory that not because our ancestors found a bush with fruit, their metabolism concluded winter was over, because there would be an energy cost in changing metabolic gears too quickly. So I think that this also is evidence on perhaps, studying diets for 2 weeks is just not enough. We don't have metabolisms that can change entirely metabolic gears overnight. To me, that makes sense in a planet where seasons take longer.
Well, particularly if it's reversed. And that was the other part.
Exactly.
And if I wanted to trick you into consuming more
Sure.
on a ketogenic diet,
Sure.
then I would have you first do this plant-based diet.
I mentioned this
beforehand.
because I like to think it the other way around. Our metabolism has this memory, so we are not easily tricked by a lucky day where our ancestors found some fruit and then, I concluded tomorrow there will be more when there won't. So I think that these metabolic memory or adaptations serve the purpose of not having a metabolism that's too easy to trick.
So Jesus, before we go to Q&A, I did want to do a couple of summary statements. The first one is that why the crossover mattered and why the order mattered was this. And let me step back before I say this and say, we get a lot of shade, a lot of frustration. People get really, really emotional about their diet. And it's like one of the big things that I really enjoyed about interviewing Robert Lustig was he's where we are. He's from Missouri or maybe from Switzerland in terms of diets, meaning low carb can work. He actually had an ancestor, like a uncle or something, that is the fella that Stevenson. He was the Scandinavian that lived with the Inuits for 2 years after a shipwreck in the Arctic, and found that the Inuits ate nothing but fat, blubber, and animal meat. They didn't have any opportunities to eat any plants, and yet they did great in terms of their metabolism. And there's a whole section of books about that and research. So his perspective was, believe it or not, I am the fiber guy, but I will tell you, I do not have a problem with even carnivore diets. So that's Robert Lustig saying, I lean more towards omnivore. I am a big fan of fiber. I'm doing a lot of work to get the fiber back into the American diet. But I can tell you the research indicates that even a carnivore diet works. The one diet that doesn't work, and that's our position as well. We've got plenty of people on plant-based that are doing great. Plenty of people on low fat, believe it or not, that do well. We lean more low carb because the hormones support it. But there is one diet that Robert Lustig doesn't like, and we don't either. And that's the standard American diet, where you're eating tons of fats and tons of processed carbs all at the same time. The processed carbs stimulate your insulin, and then you can't burn the fat that you're bringing on board. Now, let's go back to the summary statement for that Nature Medicine article that the researchers thought proved advantage low fat and why the crossover design was so important. The people that started with low fat, a low fat diet can work. It decreases the amount of calories that you're bringing on board. It's your typical energy balance model, you're just eating fewer calories. You're not getting that dense fat-based calorie input. Well, the problem with that is, I mean, the advantage is you're just not getting the calories on board. The problem is the carbs are stimulating your insulin. And that's what happened in this crossover effect. The guys that started with 2 weeks of low fat were getting a lot of carbs. You know, you got to have one of the three: fat, carbs, or protein. And they were stimulating their insulin. And it showed up in the analysis of the data. They ignored it and said, well, you know, then when you switch over, you've got a high insulin rate and you start adding dense calorie input like fats. Guess what? The combination of dense calories, the combination of fat and insulin does not work. And that was the one situation in that study where you had that, a combination of insulin and fat. So that's really, I think, the bottom line on all this. And it's so frustrating that there's so much debate and argument, because I think at the end of the day, we're all going to end up finding out a little bit more truth and moving on away from the argument. Anyhow, maybe I'm being too optimistic.
Well,
I just, if I may, one thing I can say is, and I think this is the whole point from last week's video. We know about the importance of the carbohydrate insulin model and how the amount of carbs you eat, it's going to impact the amount of insulin and all that impact. But there is some stuff that you need to be considering. Calories matter. At the end, they do. But there's also the oxidative stress causing inflammation that matters. There is also the environment and all the stuff we're exposed to that can increase our body weight. And it's not, those are not carbs. And those matter too. So it's not as simple as putting the blame on one thing. But we will put on our eye on the most common thing that we see every day. And that's definitely insulin resistance. Okay, so can we go to Q&A?
I think so.
well, you're the
I'm sorry, Jeannie, you got caught up.
Oh,
What's up?
I just said you're the Q&A Nazi, so it sounds like it's time.
No
Well-
answer for you.
No answer for you. So as a reminder, become a subscriber of the channel. Just click on becoming a member of the channel, and we're gonna be able to see your questions first. So I see Dr. Brewer kind of I want to say arguing.
Sneaking answers.
Well, arguing with somebody who said, "Are you familiar with The Simpsons? Did you watch that show at some moment?"
I've heard of it. I've seen probably a total of 3 minutes of the whole of the show.
Or that's just for us 90s people.
Yeah, that
I'm a
was
millennial
after my
now, I
time.
believe.
That
Well,
was after my time.
I was going to do a really good joke about that, but if you don't understand it, that doesn't matter anyway. But somebody
go ahead.
said that they wanted to reverse their calcium score. They were like, "Just tell me how to reverse my calcium score, and I'll subscribe." Dr. Brewer, wow, wow.
Maybe I didn't really mean it as react. I didn't mean to generate the reactions that I'm getting. Maybe I should pull that back.
Well, the joke
I'm
is
just trying to be realistic.
somebody on The Simpsons, there's an episode where somebody is trying to teach how to eat an orange,
Uh-huh.
and is making a bunch of analogies of, oh, eating an orange is like a marriage and blah blah blah, and somebody's like, just tell me how to eat the freaking orange.
So let me take that and maybe explain or interpret for myself. The bottom line is we get people all the time that want to, quote, reverse their plaque. And it depends on what you mean by reversing plaque. If you look at the typical measurement devices, especially calcium score, yes, we've had not one, but 3 people on our channel describe their own experience reversing calcium. But that's not a practical goal. And that's not what we recommend that you have as a goal. That's sort of like magic. That was my point. But what is practical? Every one of us can improve our risk. There's no question about that. And maybe I should have said that in a nicer way.
Yeah. Well, what can I say, Dr. Burr? But I mean, you're right, and it's important to set expectations, and we do that all the time with patients. A lot of patients want to do what Dr. Brewer did, and you need to understand what's the whole point, and the whole point is a long, healthy life, and that involves stabilizing plaque, and that's what you learn watching the channel and seeing Dr. Brewer as a patient. You'll learn what the realistic and healthy goal will be for you.
And we can see improvement on this, of plaque on CIMTs. We can see definite improvement, and we can see improvement in the labs, and we can see improvement all over the place. But I mean, I think people feel like when someone says, well, you have plaque, that, that's everything they've been working not to have. But there's a lot of genetic components and different things that fall into that, as well as diet and carbs and all the rest of it. So it's just, I guess, facing the truth and then dealing with what you have to deal with that being on the table, right? Understanding what's going on.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Starting from reality and getting there, because reality is not bad. In fact, once you begin to understand these messages, the current reality in our culture is, you can hit your 50s or 60s and, like Tim Russert, wake up dead one day, or be doing something like your job, pass out on the floor and die. And that's not necessary. That's where the hope is. Now, yes, to your point, Jesus, up until recently, by far our most popular video, and long term, the one that's got 4 million and something views, is my own experience, quote, reversing my plaque, end quote. That's still unusual. It's a phenomenon. It is seen, but again, you have to define it in terms of reality. I don't think that I actually pulled LDL out of my plaque and my artery walls. I think what I pulled out of my artery walls was immune cells and fluid, the stuff that goes along with hot plaque. Now, when I did that, I greatly decreased my own risk for heart attack and stroke. And that's clearly the reality that we deal with all day, every day with all of our patients. You can reliably decrease your risk. If you're going to define it, though, George, as the only way I'm going to define this is I'm going to get a massive reversal in my calcium score, that's just not reality.
Your calcium score is going to go up the more work you do, or generally that's what we see. So
yes.
And after 48 minutes, I don't know if George is still here, but George, if you're listening, I mean, we didn't mean ill intentions. We're just telling you the truth.
Jesus is you're going to have to lasso me and make me play nice.
So as you see here on Lori's OP comment, next to her name, there's an icon. That means Lori is a channel, Private Health channel, Dr. Brewer's channel member. So click on subscribe, click on join. It's a couple of bucks a month. It's not about the money. It's about making things easier for me and answering your questions. So I was there for the extra 2 feet, darn it. So Lori OP is kind of joking about what you just said. We cannot make you grow 2 feet. We cannot assure you will reverse your plaque or your calcium score. We can definitely give you information that you can use. Every case is different. And to Dr. Brewer's point, diets are tricky. Carnivore might work for you. Paleo might work for you. Vegan might work for you. We don't know. Everybody is different.
Thank you for letting me in on it, Jesus. I think I was being a bonehead. I needed some interpretation.
Let's see, PT and GB. The difference between somebody asked which is better, margarine or butter? The difference between margarine and butter is that margarine is made from hydrogenation of vegetable oil and has trans fats. Butter is made from animal fat and has large amount of saturated fats. I can't agree more. Do you have any comments on that, Dr. Brewer?
No, I will say this. There's a whole bunch of trans fats, I think, has much, much better evidence behind it. There's a lot of information about seed oils as well. And seed oils has tons and tons of information. The problem is the majority, almost all of that information is what we call environmental, where it doesn't really involve randomized clinical trials. It just involves in the environment, like in the US, seed oil consumption skyrocketed at the same time that diabetes and obesity did. So there's some challenges in this. As you know, all of us start getting into this this discussion with patients. They'll be very patient with us and say, "Okay, all that's very nice, but what do you do?" And I don't eat margarine anymore. I eat regular butter, and I avoid seed oils when possible as well.
I think this conversation about seed oils is an interesting one. We have a video with Dr. Kenobi, who is the main proponent of this. You can watch it on the YouTube. Just put Dr. Kenobi and Dr. Brewer. It's a long video. It's not a short. He shows all the evidence that he has on this field. I like to think that vegetable oils, trans fats are just part of the bigger problem, and I'm a Lustig fan on that side. It's processed foods. There's a bunch of stuff that is wrong with processed foods. Vegetable oils, trans fats are part of that problem. I'll say that the biggest problem is added sugars and carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm. Well, and lately I've had quite a few patients that are, really confused on diet, and they don't even know where to go, and they're eating lettuce and chicken because they are afraid to eat anything else. And, I've had a couple that have lost a lot of weight and keep going down because they really don't know what to do. And so sometimes we even, we look at the glycemic index of carbs and look at that because they have more fiber in the carb. And I know there's some discussion right now talking about fiber's bad and this and that, but whole foods is, a good place to start too with diet. Again, everybody responds differently, so we can only give you options, but that's just one of those things I was thinking might be important.
Be aware of the word whole grains, because that gets Dr. Brewer started.
I mean, whole things that are grown in a place. Or
yeah. Do you want to do a quick rant on whole grains, Dr. Brewer?
Hey, sis, am I that bad?
No, not at all.
So I will do a rant on that, though. It's a great invitation. How many times have we heard and seen the comment, whole grains, whole grains, whole grains? And so then you assume something like, here's where that goes. Whole grains are actually healthy because they do have fiber for the most part. The grains now are often criticized for being Franken grains. They've been altered. But for the most part, you keep the fiber in a grain and it helps a lot. Now, on the other hand, that gets interpreted to, whole wheat bread or whole rye bread. The glycemic index, and yes, I know glycemic index has its own set of baggage, but it's good for something like this. The glycemic index of white bread is 65 to 70 or 55 to 65, depending on where you look. The glycemic index of whole wheat bread is like 50 to 60, depending on where you look. In other words, yeah, it's a little better. And the glycemic index for good old sucrose table sugar is 50. So believe it or not, if you're reaching for that whole wheat bread in the grocery store, thinking it's going to be healthy for you and your family, you're reaching for something that raises their blood sugar more than table sugar. Thank you for the rant.
All right, let's go to the next one. So this is a really good question. Ricky the Gun And I appreciate Ricky Degan often sends really good questions. Dr. Bird, you're not fond of stress tests and stents, but when experiencing angina, how else do you determine the extent of the restriction? Wouldn't relieving the restriction be valuable for quality of life? Let me start and then I'll let you continue, so you can fill the gaps on anything I say. Um, yes, when there's angina, which is chest pain because of blood flow restriction, that can come from stable coronary artery disease. You can have a stable plaque that is just obstructing that much that is causing chest pain. That can happen. Even there, my perspective, I don't think I'm gonna do a stress test. I'll probably get a CT angiogram if I want to say I want to look at the arteries and see how much that is blocked. I probably do that myself. Now, do I need a stent? Yes or no? Take a look at the ischemia trial and the orbiter trial. There were some mild differences between people getting a stent for the chest pain, people getting medical treatment, meaning medications and lifestyle. But every case is different. We have cases of people who ended up trying the stent and the angina went away. People getting the stent and the angina did not improve that much. Every case is different. I think there's a possibility. But of course, blood flow restriction for chest pain is important. What you need to be aware of is thinking that because you stop the chest pain and you have a stent on it, you are free of risk. That's not the case. You still can have a heart attack. Dr. Brewer?
Well, I'm getting such a probably well-deserved reputation for being a grouch and a grump. I'm going to present it maybe different this time. A stress test is actually a great test. It's good for cardiovascular endurance and exercise. So it's exercise capacity. So I don't think anybody's ever heard me say that it's a terrible test for either of those items. Here's where it's the problem. It's not a great test for predicting a heart attack, and that's what it's used for. So it's a great test, but it's in our culture, medical culture, as well as the patient culture, it's just being used for the wrong thing. It does not predict heart attacks.
We
How
even
about
have
that?
a thumbnail.
Should I leave it at that?
I think that's good. We even have a thumbnail of you with a weird mask on your face, like doing a stress test
Oh, really?
on one video. And your hair is orange for some reason, or purple for some reason. Jeannie, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think he covered it.
I meant the stress test, not Dr. Brewer's orange hair on that thumbnail.
No.
Let me go to Woody Wilgring. So does the study try to explain with this LDL increase occurs when you have a low BMI? Yes, but if you are on a low carb diet, that's the key thing. People on a low carb diet, low BMI, that's what seemed to be correlated or associated with an increase of LDL. Does that cause heart disease? That's what Dave Feldman is trying to define on the research that he has ongoing. I think that's going to get published this year, probably.
So, Jesus, can I respond to that quickly as well?
Sure, please do.
I think Woody's asking a little, I'm going to interpret it maybe as saying Woody might be asking a little bit about that lipid energy model that Dave Feldman talks about. Basically, what they're saying is LDL in those people that are not taking carbs and they're thin. And I think there's some genetic variation that focuses on that as well. And I think we just haven't discovered it yet. But in those people, what's happening is LDL is becoming the currency for energy. In other words, they're getting their energy from triglycerides, fats, and that's being transported in LDL particles. The LDL particles are taking it from the liver down to the rest of the body where the body uses it. It unloads the triglyceride and it burns it for fuel. Then you're seeing the empty LDL coming back to the liver to pick up more triglyceride. And that's where you'll hear Dave Feldman, when he's trying to describe this lipid energy model, or Nick Norwitz, they talk about empty boats. LDL, the LDL particles are just a bunch of empty boats. Nick Norwitz has a great description if you want to get a little bit more technical about it, and talking about the enzymes that are used to unload the fat from the triglyceride or the fatty acid from the LDL particle down in the periphery.
Great point, Dr. Brewer. Robert Moravicki posed a question that is very interesting. Isn't the real reason LDL goes up when you get on a low-carb diet the way LDL is calculated? He's showing a formula, calculated LDL, total cholesterol, less HDL, less triglycerides, divided by 5. If you increase your HDL and decrease your triglycerides, then your calculated LDL will go up.
I never thought about that.
That's interesting, but I think the one thing that is the missing piece there is the total cholesterol.
It's right there, isn't it?
Because the total cholesterol, that's a factor that itself is not impacted by triglycerides alone.
Well, I think Jeannie's saying in that, is that the Friedewald equation there? Calculated LDL equals total cholesterol minus HDL. So Jeannie's saying the total cholesterol, it starts with total cholesterol.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is, people on a low-carb diet, lean mass hyperresponders, they will have an impact on triglycerides and HDL. I'm not aware of an impact on triglycerides impacting total cholesterol alone. So that's where, even though you might decrease your triglycerides, you might decrease your HDL, your total cholesterol is going to be the same at the end.
I will say this: I'm not smart enough to figure that out right now. I think that's a very interesting concept.
It's an interesting concept, yes, for sure,
Really
for sure. But even there, I think we can always make the point. Even mainstream guidelines are running away from LDL and starting to talk more about ApoB.
Right.
But everybody agrees that it's healthier to have some good high functional HDL and low triglycerides. Nobody is arguing that.
But LDL, ApoB is the building block of LDL, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So
and
they
for
just
other
Right.
IDL and VLDL as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that
That's
where
why
you're
they're
going,
saying-
Jeannie?
Yeah, well, I'm just saying if they switch from looking at LDL and look at ApoB, it's going to be. So I mean, they're just looking for the beginning. Is that what they're looking for? To see if they can figure out there.
One of the, somebody starts mentioning Dayspring, and this gets into that group, Dayspring, Atia, Tom Schneiderman. Tom Schneiderman wrote a great article talking about ApoB, and I think he's absolutely right in most ways, at least when you look in that world. When you look in the world of LDL versus ApoB, there's no question that ApoB is better, because ApoB makes VLDL. Fred, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Fred LaRuquente makes some good points about VLDL being a big actor here. And as Jesus just mentioned, I haven't heard anybody argue or debate that VLDL is not bad. It's not atherogenic, that it doesn't cause problems. And as Schneiderman pointed out in his article, you do want to know the rest of the ApoB population, and very specifically VLDL. If you go back to that lipid energy model, a VLDL is what you get when you have these LDL particles. You take them to the liver, and the liver just dumps a lot of triglyceride or fatty acids on that LDL particle. It swells up, it becomes VLDL. That makes sense as well. When you're looking at density, fat is less dense than protein. So you have an LDL particle, you add a bunch of fat to it, it becomes very low density. That then goes to the muscles, and hopefully it dumps that triglyceride off. And that's, again, what you get with these lean mass hyperresponders. Their muscles are saying, hey, we need more energy. We need more of that triglyceride. So their muscles are much better at taking that triglyceride off of the LDL. You see very low VLDL or remnant cholesterol in those lean mass hyperresponders. And that's why the metabolic health is so important. If your metabolic health is good, you're not overburdened with energy, with energy stored as fat, then your muscles are taking those triglycerides off of the LDL and burning them.
Yep. And pointing out to JP Tarts mentioned, I didn't know LDL was calculated. It is mostly calculated on the lab report. Yes, of course. And I'm going to close with the last question for today. Well, two questions. One, PT and JB, after losing 35 pounds, hit a brick wall. OGTT shows insulin 6 times maximum reference range.
Ooh.
That's what we were saying.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We see that all the time, PT and JB. It's just that so few people actually see it on the, you don't get a lot of insight into that. Thank you.
T-said, no soup for you. That's right. Alan Turner, how does saturated fat in the diet impact endothelial progenitor cells? Such a deep question. I don't have the answer to that. I can tell you there's some research that suggests saturated fats and some fatty acids like palmitic acid, stearic acid, oleic acid, linoleic acid. There are 3 ways they can impact the cell of the endothelium and cause plaque. That's what has been studied. Some of those acids promote inflammation, reactive because oxygen species, and decrease nitric oxide. We're going to talk about nitric oxide next month. We have a really, really important guest for that.
A Nobel Prize winner.
Nobel Prize winner, the guy who discovered nitric oxide.
Dr. No.
But that's kind of the mechanisms behind some fatty acids and saturated fats and even some vegetable oils. So that's kind of the way it goes. Saturated fats itself, if we at some moment want to cover that, we can go over different food sources for saturated fats, different processed meat and all that stuff. We can cover that at some moment.
Jeannie, were you impressed that Jesus knew all that?
It was pretty impressive. You've been hiding that, Jesus.
I was impressed. I didn't know that.
Well, that's what a quick Google search can do for you, right? No, you need that's one thing. That's one thing that you learn in medical school, or you're supposed to learn in medical school, is to find research and interpret that. Mm-hmm. And that's what we try to do for you guys.
And you do, Jesus. You do a fine job in reading the research and interpreting and sharing.
Okay.
So before we go, I'm going to apologize for being Oscar the Grouch, and I won't do it next time. Well, I'll be more positive in the way I say I hit us with reality.
I don't know if George is going to hear that. George, if you hear that, click the subscribe button. If you hate us, share us with your enemies. Send that to people that you don't like.
I have to tell you, I've been doing that from day one. When people want to say, "Oh, I'll do this if you do that," and this is not reality, I'd rather say, "This is maybe not a good match."
You were saving that, and you just exploded today.
Well, there we go.
All right. Well, nice for joining us. See you next week.